Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. Joining us now, and we're delighted to have him, is Jim Dean. Jim Dean is chair of Democracy for America, which I believe is the nation's largest political action committee, and it is progressive. He founded it with his brother Howard in 2004, and he is here to talk with us today. Jim, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Good. Now, listen, there's a lot going on. Obviously, presidential politics is in the air, as always, but even more so after the State of the Union and discussion about how the Republican challengers will take it and so on. But let's talk about the Democratic side. Democracy for America is backing a movement to draft Senator Elizabeth Warren for president. Am I getting that right?
That's absolutely correct. We have joined with Move On, who, truth be told, is actually a larger organization than ours. And they're absolutely terrific to work with. And we are doing a draft Elizabeth Warren campaign. We are, as we speak, setting up organizational infrastructure in both Iowa and New Hampshire with folks on the ground. And we are very much going to encourage the senator to throw her hat in the ring. And in particular, we want to make sure that her values, which are our values and the values of really most Americans, are firmly and squarely front and center in the presidential primary debate that we're going to have in the coming months and certainly into 2016.
Well, let me ask you this question, Jim, and I ask this as someone who we're an advocacy journalism show, and I'm all for Elizabeth Warren in every way, getting out in front of the public, including as a presidential candidate. But let me ask you about objectives here. Is the objective to make Elizabeth Warren the candidate of the Democratic Party? Is the objective to get her into the race, to move Hillary Clinton to the left? Is it all of the above, something I haven't thought of yet? What are we after here?
Well, I think we could say all of the above, but really the short-term objective is to get her to run in this race. And when she does that, then the objective is going to be to have her win the nomination. And when she wins the nomination, we're going to try to get it so that she can be president and get those votes out for her. And along every step of the way, whether she has declared or not, as we go through these near-term months at least, we certainly need to make sure that her agenda, again, and her values are front and center in the debate. That's part of organizing for a candidate, but it's also part of the debate process itself. So there's a lot that's in there. But yes, bottom line is yes, we want her to run.
Okay. And I guess one of the other questions, obviously, these are all obvious questions, but I got to ask them anyway.
Sure.
She most recently told Sheila Bair, who she has a longstanding history with in financial reform, in Forbes magazine, when asked, is she, everybody was parsing her words, I am not running for president, present tense and all that. She seemed to be pretty unequivocal with Sheila Bair when she said, when Bair asked her, are you going to run for president? And she said no. What do you guys say to that?
Well, there's two things on that. One, the sale never starts until the customer says no. So we're certainly going to keep pursuing our objectives in this. And secondly, she has said this in one way or another before, and I expect that this is going to happen again. We have seen this before in draft campaigns. And we don't expect someone to say that they're running until they're actually running. So our job is to get a field structure on the ground, particularly in these early critical states, and get folks out for her so that that groundwork is laid. Much the way it was actually, a lot of it was in place, for example, when Wes Clark decided to run rather late in the game back in 2004. And actually, he was in pretty good shape to make a big dent in that primary, except for they kind of abandoned the grassroots effort of it, and it sort of fizzled in the first debate. But certainly during that period leading up to it, there was a lot of equivocating, and there was even some no quotes in there. But you just got to keep your head down and keep working on it.
So you guys are basically part of your strategy is not just to let Elizabeth Warren know that there's a lot of folks out there would like to see her run, but also to kind of gas up the car and have it idling in the driveway should she decide to take it for a spin.
That's a great way of putting it, and we hope it'll be more than a spin. But yes, we want to have that car gassed up and ready to go. And I feel very strongly about this. I feel very strongly about her. She has really spoken truth to power, but she's also built great power for herself. And I think it's very important that we move that forward. And I also put this in a negative light, which I don't like to do, but I think it's really true here. And I'm very convinced of the fact that if her agenda is not front and center in this debate and front and center in the Democratic Party's messaging going into 2016, no matter who the nominee is, we're going to lose the election. And so we really need to do this. We need her to run. We need to be her to be in this. And for the time being, while she's not running, we need her to be the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
Now, that's a great point. And we're talking with Jim Dean, a director of Democracy for America, about their efforts with Move On to get Elizabeth Warren into the presidential race. Now, here's let me run this by you, Jim. There's a cynical left position here, not entirely unjustified, I would say, and it goes a little bit like this. Okay, Elizabeth Warren gets into the race. What she manages to do is liberalize Hillary Clinton's rhetoric, move Hillary a little to the left, but at the end of the day, she gets elected, and like Democrats before her, doesn't live up to those promises, and it's business as usual. That's the cynical view, the disengaged view. What would you say to people who take that perspective on this?
Well, I have always felt that you could call her left wing, and I certainly don't mind us being called a left wing organization. But the fact of the matter is, Elizabeth Warren, throughout her life, has been a consumer advocate. She didn't actually acquire the left wing label until she went to Washington, and everyone started calling her that because, particularly on the Republican side, they didn't like her banking reform. The banking reforms that she was trying to implement, or her work with the Consumer Protection Agency. So a lot of this is rhetoric that has been created, but doesn't really reflect who she is. And I would point out, it's not scientific, but I'm sure you read the piece by Dan Balls about the focus group in Colorado.
Oh, yes.
Pointing out the interest in her among the independents and Republicans. There's a lot of that out there because, very simply, most Americans, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, do feel that the system is rigged against them, do feel that the system works only to the benefit of big business, particularly investment banking business. And her message very much transcends all of that. And I think her message very much transcends all of those labels. Even Lanny Davis, of all people, made a reference to that. So I think, as she goes through this process, first she's got to run, but as we go through this process, a lot of that's going to get shed. I think she's much more of a mainstream candidate, and people will know that when she starts running.
Jim Dean, Democracy for America, you make a great point, and I think this is one worth emphasizing, which is it's only inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. itself that these positions are considered far left. Now, I don't mind being called a guy of the left at all. But the fact is that if you guys have looked at the polling, I'm sure that's part of your effort here, part of the thinking behind it. But the fact is, when you talk about consumer protections, breaking up the big banks, taxing millionaires, a lot of things that people associate with Elizabeth Warren and her points of view, a lot of these are ideas that a majority of Republican voters support, not just Democrats, not just independents. So I think in a way, wouldn't an Elizabeth Warren candidacy be the candidacy of the real center? In Washington, centrists are people who take the most conservative wing of the Democratic Party, mix it with the crazy right-wing Republicans. That's centrism. But out there in America, I'm not saying Washington is not America. I'm not one of those conservative guys. But out there in the rest of the country, isn't this really mainstream stuff that Elizabeth Warren is preaching?
Oh, I think it is, and I have to say that part of this is my own bias. I mean, I come from a background of consumer marketing research before I got into this the whole political stuff, and I really look at this and think of consumers as a very angry lot. They haven't had a raise. 99% of them haven't had a raise for 20 to 30 years. They have really been disempowered in the marketplace. Even this oil and gas stuff that we're talking about now with the prices going down, our inventories in oil and gas have been at record highs for over 10 years. They have been playing this game for a decade before the bubble finally burst. So I think a lot of folks really want the consumer to be back in the driver's seat, want the American worker to be back in the driver's seat, and want opportunity to restore to this country. And again, those are mainstream values. And she's the one that's willing to stand up to these people. I think that's also part of a lot of broad-based attraction to her, is that she's been willing to stand up to the big banks, and she's been willing to stand up to government regulators who don't do their job at regulating these banks, which is one of the reasons we have this. We've had these problems in the first place. So, we'll see. I'm not dismissive of the messaging that comes from any center of power, whether it be Albany, New York, or Washington, D.C., or any other place in the country. But I think she is one that could probably overcome that in a way that, say, George McGovern could not back in 1968.
Well, and it's a very interesting point. I mean, I also spent some time in the business world, and I love the consumer angle on this. If you're able to stay for another segment, maybe we can talk about that a little bit, because it seems to me that the American people are frustrated as consumers, and it is there that they often feel their powerlessness in the new unequal economy that's been building up over the last several decades. And if someone can put a name to that and a voice to it and say that the company that keeps you on hold for 25 minutes, there's maybe a company, for example, that has monopolistic power, maybe there's something we can explore there. Jim, are you able to stay with us for another segment?
I'd be delighted. It'd be terrific. Thank you.
All right, so let's do this. We're going to take a break right about now, if we can. And what we're going to do when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the movement to draft Elizabeth Warren with Jim Dean, Director of Democracy for America. And we're also going to explore some of the related issues and maybe how they could bring disaffected voters back into the fold. So stick with us. We're going to talk a little bit more with Jim Dean when we come back from this break. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour. And we are back on The Zero Hour. We are talking with Jim Dean, Director of Democracy for America, about DFA's efforts to, along with Move On, to draft Elizabeth Warren to run for the presidency. And Jim, I got excited about where our conversation was going before we took the break, because, it seems to me that nobody has tapped into this huge force. Everybody across the political spectrum is frustrated with their bank. They're frustrated with the raw deal they get when checks bounce, but that connects to, what I call the, dial 9 and wait forever syndrome. And it seems to me that what you were saying, you have a background in that stuff. I knew it when you said the sale begins when the customer says no. So, so I guess, and I have something of a business background too. So I guess I was going to really explore that with you a little bit. Do you think there's a chance that an Elizabeth Warren can speak to that? We saw horrendously low voter turnout in 2014. Obviously, it will be much better 2016 presidential year. But do Democrats sometimes miss the opportunity to tap into the disaffected voters who stay home? And could the Elizabeth Warren's pro-customer message do something about that?
Yes, I think yes on both counts. Democrats do miss an opportunity. I think we missed a lot of opportunities in this last election cycle. I think part of that is that polling data and, as you might say, consumer data are always a little bit different. For example, I think it would have been very interesting. We'll never know how this would have worked, but if we saw candidates running on the Affordable Care Act, which many consumers like. And I'm not talking about just the folks, the millions of Americans that have got insurance that never had it before. And I'm talking about a lot of businesses, smaller businesses, who are saving money on healthcare costs. But yet none of the candidates really ran on that. What they were presented with was data from polling data that said that Obama was unpopular, and with a lot of ongoing discussions about how to message that. And it wasn't really, frankly, putting our best foot forward, to put it diplomatically. So, I think we need to run more on these issues. And we always talk about running on bread and butter issues, but we don't really do anything about it. We throw a lot of stuff up there on TV, and we spend a lot of money on that, but we're not out engaging the voters directly about that as much as we should be. And we've really got to do a much better job on that. And, the thing about Warren on this is she does speak truth to power in a way that other elected officials do not, including some very progressive ones. Some of it is just personality, but some of it is also the fact that she's been willing to stand up to people who are thought of as traditional funders in politics on both sides of the aisle. And that, to me, I think Americans get that. When they see her, they understand that she's willing to burn some of those traditional bridges, and that sets her apart from everybody else. And I think that's something that makes her a very attractive candidate in the minds of a lot of Americans. The trick is can she be disciplined enough, the way Barack Obama was, for example, particularly in 2008, to also be a presidential candidate, because that's a very, very difficult line to walk. It was one that Howard tried to walk and was not successful at doing. Obama walked it and was successful, but he turned out to be not as progressive as we thought. Could Warren, as a candidate, talk about these issues, talk about things like the Comcast-Time Warner merger, which is really bad for consumers, and both companies of which have some of the worst customer satisfaction ratings of any business in this country. Can she talk to power, speak truth to power on stuff like that? And I'd be very interested to see that. I know she could, and I know she would. And the question is can Americans not only they'll come around to it, but when they come around to it in the context of a presidential campaign and somebody who can be their president? And I think that's very possible, but we haven't been down that road yet, so it'll be new territory.
Yeah, that's interesting. Of course, a lot of people doubted that with Barack Obama in 2008, yes, too. And while I've had my criticisms of him, I have to say from that point forward, he was able to exercise a kind of Zen focus in that discipline you're talking about that was really, really impressive and unusual. So don't be too rough on your brother. It's a tough thing to master. And I think you're making a great point. That said, when she breaks that mold, Elizabeth Warren, and she talks to people and just says, her speech last couple weeks ago, I guess, where she said to Citigroup, "You're right, Dodd-Frank had its flaws. We didn't break you up." I mean, that's tough stuff, and I think it resonates with people, doesn't it?
Yeah, I really do. And there's some very interesting legislation around about breaking up banks, and she is the first, one of the few elected officials, I should say, that can talk about this to the public in a way that the public gets. I thought that Citigroup speech was remarkable because the actual substance of what Congress had just voted on in that spending bill by attaching the federally insured deposits to derivatives trading and rolling back Dodd-Frank, that's really tough stuff to explain. And she took a very, very good tack, I thought, a very smart tack, about explaining the process that this went through, which was Citicorp writing the legislation, which it did. And I think that really got a lot of people interested in what the problem was, as well as outraged, frankly, that this is really sort of a cut and dry part of our political process these days. I mean, it's not supposed to work that way, and clearly it did in this case. So she's very much the person who can bring that message across.
Now, I got to ask you this next question. You mentioned your brother, Howard Dean, of course, and he is, last I heard, supporting Hillary Clinton for president. We've just had the holidays. Were everything cool at the Christmas dinners?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I do like to crack a lot of jokes about this, but I guess I better be careful. But to be truthful, I'm very, very positive about this. First of all, I think progressives, certainly within our community, are in a better place with Secretary Clinton. And that has showed up in some polling work that we've done. It's not that they're wildly necessarily big fans of hers, but they understand what the choices are and don't view her in the same light, which was somewhat more negative, as they did back in 2008. Secondly, we very much respect Howard's decision, as well as respect Secretary Clinton on this. And he certainly is going to go out and be fully supportive of her. And the third reason that, and this is the most important one of all for us anyway, is that this really cements the intention that we had to make this a positive campaign about Warren, and especially MoveOn. MoveOn also really wanted this to be a positive campaign. And I think the presence of both of us in taking these separate positions it really helps that a lot. It keeps this thing on a much better level than most primaries are. They usually degenerate into personality fights or whatever, and a lot of conflict that isn't necessarily there. And I think we have some built-in apparatus against that, which is going to keep this debate on a much better level than most primaries.
Well, that would certainly be refreshing. One last question for Jim Dean, Director of Democracy for America. How can people help you with this Elizabeth Warren, draft Elizabeth Warren effort? Where can people go to get more information, maybe contribute time or money or whatever?
Well, sure. We do have a separate website called Run Warren Run, or you can just go to our website, which is democracyforamerica.com. And we will have lots of information. We're doing a bunch of house parties at the end of this month in late January, and then we're going to be doing a lot of other organizing activities around that and certainly around Elizabeth Warren, both in Iowa and New Hampshire and elsewhere in the coming months. So stay tuned and go on the site, and you'll be able to find out all kinds of cool stuff that we're doing.
Well, excellent. Well, we hope you guys will come back and keep us posted on this. We think it's a great initiative. Jim Dean, Chair of Democracy for America, DFA, thanks so much for joining us.
Richard, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. And we will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.